Hello everyone, welcome to the stream. Thanks for joining me today on this Sunday. I'm Trent. If you haven't been here before, thanks for joining. If you have been here before, welcome back. I see we have some people in the chat. Breezer, hello, welcome back. And Big Book Cafe, glad you're here again. Thanks for that tip, Breezer, about the setting up the notification for the live stream. I have to look into that and see how that can be better done. I kind of have to like revamp my whole kind of front page for YouTube. I just haven't really done anything with it in a while. I think I can probably change some of the layout there a little bit. I don't have like an introductory video or anything like that, so maybe that's something I'll need to add at some point. I just kind of been going with what's there. So if you guys can hear me, if you just can let me know. It looks like everything's fine on my side based on the analytics here, so I'm going to assume it's working, so hopefully it is. Today, we're kind of continuing on a topic that we started last week from kind of the Affinity photo perspective. For those of you who haven't been here, I should say, usually I kind of start the session with kind of a prepared topic on some kind of theme, related to graphic design or certain software, usually Affinity Designer. And then like later on, I start answering your questions from the comments on my videos throughout the week. Now, if you have any comments or questions on this topic as I'm going through it, the vector warp, certainly you can ask as I'm going through it and I'll answer them. If you have other kind of questions, remind me at the end after, and then I'll try to answer those as well. So thanks for letting me know. Everything sounds good, guys. Hi, Bill. Welcome from Florida. And so yeah, today we'll be talking about the vector warp in Affinity Designer. And for those who are wondering, like, what does this mean? Well, basically, I'm in Affinity Designer right now. The main thing we'll be looking at is this option down here. Let me zoom in. This button, Vector Warp. And let me click on it. So these are the options you have. They're the same thing in the screenshot over there. So these are the tools for distorting a vector. And before we go into this, I just want to do like a brief little review of last week, because it's kind of a little bit different than what we did last week. Last week we were talking about warping raster images like photographs. So let me open up Affinity Photo here. So this is Affinity Photo, and I have an image loaded here, got online. And the way it works for raster images is a little bit different than vectors. If you remember last time, when we want to distort these type of images, we use some of the live filters down here. So is this button here, which isn't in Affinity Designer. So this button here is what you click to get the options to warp the raster images. So I'll show you an example of that. Hi, Brian. Glad it's super sunny in Cambridgeshire, UK. Yeah, it's actually in Massachusetts. We're having a pretty nice sunny day, not incredibly humid or in the 90s or anything like that. It's around 80, which I don't know, is 17 Celsius or something, maybe somewhere around there. Kind of pretty comfortable. So with the raster images, the way you can distort them is if I click the live filters here. These are our non-destructive options. And if you want to know exactly how these work, I recommend looking at my live stream from last week. We went over these in more detail. I'll just show you one or two for the moment to just remind you. So I'll add the ripple. This one will give a pretty visible effect. So you can see I'm rippling my image here, and it's added as a kind of nested child to the layer here. I could drag it and put it above too. It would affect everything below it. But the main thing is when you add these types of live filters, they're non-destructive. So if I close the control, I can always toggle on and off. I can delete it if I want. If I want to modify it later, I can go and I can do things with it to change it. And I can also mask them. So they themselves are masks, but you can also, if you like, I like to add manually a mask, just I find it a little bit clearer. So if I take my mask, as we know with masks, when you paint black, you're erasing the effect. So I'll paint black here, and you can see my castle isn't being rippled anymore because I've painted black over that area, and that's going to suppress the rippling effect. Let me make that even more extreme. This is probably, on the stream, this is probably causing some lag with all this distorted information here. But hopefully it's getting the point across. You can see I was able to mask out some of the ripple effect, and it's non-destructive. And as we mentioned last week, there's this kind of thing where you'll notice sometimes on the edges, you get this transparency pulled in, and you can turn on alpha to help fix that problem. Sometimes it does it better than others. Sometimes it just brings in like black, which isn't that helpful. And sometimes it does bring in a little more color. So that's kind of basically how these controls work for the raster images. So now the question is like, can we do a similar thing for our vectors? Like that would be cool, right? So let's go back to Affinity Photo. Now, before we look at the vectors, I actually want to, in Affinity Designer, I want to actually show you how you can work with raster images in Affinity Designer, because it's a little bit unintuitive at first. So let me open up a file here. So this is an image here, as I've said in big letters here. And kind of a common thing that happens is, you select your image and then you see down here, there's this warp group option, okay? So these are the options we're going to be looking at today. And you think, well, hey, that sounds good. Let's warp our image here. So you click this and maybe you click perspective and then you start dragging the corners and you notice this kind of thing happening. And this isn't really what you expect, right? You expect the thing to actually be bent, but when we do it with these warp filters, it's not actually working that way. So let me undo that. So there's a couple ways you can actually warp images in Affinity Designer. So I'll show you that first before we look at the vectors, just so you're not frustrated with that aspect of it. So one thing is this pixel persona here. This has some additional options for working with pixel-based images, like PNGs and JPEGs. So I'll click this here. And I kind of lied when I said the live filters weren't in Affinity Designer. There's two they included. So if you go to Layer, and then New Live Filter Layer, they actually give you two here, Perspective and Mesh Warp. So if I go to Perspective, now this warp filter actually acts like we expect it to. So you can see I can actually bend my raster images within Affinity Designer. So again, I'm in the pixel persona here, and what I did, let me start over. I went to Layer, New Live Filter Layer, okay? So this is kind of the key thing you want to do here if you're working with raster images. And it's kind of a hidden feature. I mean, it could be more obvious, but it's kind of something you just kind of have to know was there. So that's one way you can bend images, and you can do the mesh warp also. So Layer, New Live Filter Layer, Mesh Warp. And we'll talk more about mesh warp in a bit, but this is, gives you more flexibility over how you want to bend things. Now the other thing you can do, and I showed this in a video earlier this week, is you can actually quickly switch to Affinity Photo when you're working in Affinity Designer, or vice versa. You can switch among the programs very quickly. And I made a video on that this week. I recommend checking that out if you want the more detailed view, or it's kind of like a 2-minute video, so it's not super detailed. But if you have your document open here in any of the Affinity programs, you can go to File, and then you can say Edit in Photo. So I'll click this. And then my whole project opens up in Affinity Photo here. And I can basically do anything I want here. I can add a live filter. So I'll add, let's do the perspective this way. Let me put it on my image. So I can distort my image like that. I can do other things. So one thing I like in Affinity Photo is this in-painting tool. So this is the tool here that lets you kind of magically erase things. So for example, I can add a pixel layer above it. I can select my in-painting tool, so this brush down here. And very important, you want to make sure you select current layer and below. This always messes me up. I always forget to do that. But let's say I want to erase this house, so I can paint over the house. Let's see how it does. And it's gone. So it's a nice little trick that I can just jump into Affinity Photo and use these tools. And then when I want to go back to Affinity Designer, I can just say File, Edit in Designer, and I'm back here. And I can continue doing my vector things or whatever else I like to do. So it's a really convenient thing, this ability to switch between the programs here. And obviously you have to have all of them licensed and installed on your computer. So that's a requirement, a prerequisite. But it works quite well, and that's another way to edit raster images if you're in Affinity Designer and you have the other programs going. So that was just like how you can handle raster images there. So let me, I'll save this and I'll close it. So now let's actually like talk about the vector warp abilities. So this is kind of the focus today. And let me see here. Let's talk about mesh warp to begin with. That's the top one. Now, I just created an empty document. Let me just create a shape to begin with. So I'll just draw a star, and this is a vector. So I use my shapes over here. If you're not sure, like you have these shapes over here, and you might see a star, you might see something else. Probably it's rounded rectangle by default. So if you see that, just like click and hold, and you can choose all these different shapes here. I like a star just for my basic example. It's a little more interesting than a circle. But let's get started with the mesh warp filter here. So with my star selected, I can go to my warp groups over here, and I can select mesh. So I'll select mesh. And you can see I got this grid here. And mesh is kind of like the basic warp filter that's kind of the foundation of all the other ones. So if I look at the other ones, they're kind of, some of them are just like presets for the mesh filter, and they're not really that different. But one of the key things is to kind of notice what's going on in the layer stack here. So when you add the warp group to it, it literally creates a special group, and it's warping everything that's in this group. So you probably want to see what can I actually do. Let me actually make it do something. So I have these control points, and I can drag them around. Let's make our star. I'll just do something with our star here. And I can pull it and I can distort it. We'll see more useful examples later, but this is something I can do here. It almost looks like it's dancing there. Now, as I said, this is a group. So if I put something else in that group, it'll also be affected by that mesh. So let's put some other interesting shape in there. Let's put a gear in there, the cog. Let's give it a different color. Whoops. So right now, it's outside of that group. If I drag it inside over here, now you can see as I move it around, it's being affected by the warp as well. So the warp group is affecting everything that's inside of it, okay? Sometimes you'll see these little distortions over here, but usually, like, I don't know if you can see this, like that. If you just like zoom in and zoom out, usually it refreshes. It's just a temporary glitch. But this is kind of the key thing here, is like it is a group, and I don't know how often you would use that fact. Like most of the times when I'm doing it, I just have one thing in there. But if you want to put multiple things in there, you know, it can be done that way. So mesh is kind of the default warp there. So let me start with a square here. Yeah, let's just use a rounded rectangle. I'll delete this one. Let's add a new one to it. What's a good color? Yellow. So when you have the mesh, you can kind of see different aspects of it. We have the lines between them, and then we have these control points. And the control points, I hope you can see, they have these handles here, so you can kind of drag them in and out. And they kind of work like typical Bezier curves, you know, so you can drag things around. If you want to like change the curve, you can change the angle of the way things go in and out of it, like that. And it's kind of something you'll want to experiment with as it goes on. Now, the key thing is like, well, we have this default grid of, I guess, 4x4. Can we add more? And the answer is, yeah, of course we can. So let's say I want to subdivide this middle one up more. If I click on the line here, I can add another subdivision there. Okay, so I can add additional subdivisions like that. If I click on this line, it adds more subdivisions. So you can always kind of break it up even more if you like, if you want more fine-grained control. I should mention too, like with the objects, when you select it with the move tool here, like that's how you actually move it around. And if you want to actually select the mesh itself, go to the white arrow here, the node tool. So click that, and then you get the mesh tool back there. Now let me go back to kind of the default state here. Something you can also do is drag like a patch of your mesh around. Excuse me. So if I click in the middle here, you see I added like a little dot. Now I can click that dot and I can drag that part of my my mesh around. Now it doesn't actually look too meaningful right now because it's all the same color, but if there was more stuff happening in there, it would look probably more interesting. Let me get a more interesting example going here. Let me create a shape. Hi Secmatera, thanks for joining. Let me create like some type of I don't know, like a circle with like various, just a split circle, you know. So let's do, whoops. So let's do this. Get some stuff going. Let's space them evenly. Add them together. Just draw a circle. I guess I'll bring this to the front. Subtract it out. So here we have like a shape. Now I can add a gradient to this. Let me make the background a bit darker. Now one of the downsides of the vector warp tools is that they don't actually support gradients. So let me add a gradient here. Whoop, to this. So I'm just using the gradient tool down here. Let's make it, I don't know, some type of futuristic retro gradient. It's probably an oxymoron, futuristic retro, but. So yeah, this is something I think could be improved. It doesn't support it yet. So if I add a gradient to this, or if I add a mesh to this, let's go to our mesh. You'll notice the mesh doesn't actually affect the gradient itself. So if I pull this all the way down, you're not getting the gradient itself isn't being pulled around. You may think it is, but it's actually not. So if you pay attention kind of to this pink part, even if I drag the pink part up, it's not actually affecting the gradient. So this is a shortcoming of Affinity. It doesn't actually support like gradient meshes in general yet. The gradients are always just kind of the way you define them originally. Hopefully that's something that will change in the future, but that's a limitation right now. Something you can also do, like let me make another little pattern here. This pattern is kind of in style a lot, so let me make like a checkerboard here. So I'll make like a checkerboard, and I'll add these together. Just trying to add a background to it. Let's add like a pink background. So you can kind of get these interesting like distortion effects. So if I add like so this is kind of a vector, you know, some curves, a rectangle. It's a vector. Let's add a mesh gradient to it. And kind of distort it around. You kind of see this is like kind of this, I don't know, it's called like this Y2K, kind of trippy style these days. I did some carpets that had like a design like this. It's kind of interesting. But what you can then do is you can actually like bring in another vector into it. Now let me show you something. Hey Bradders, thanks for joining. You're saying you just started using this program along with Affinity Photo 2. Yeah, they're quite powerful together. So you can also apply this to more sophisticated vectors. So let me bring in something here. I'll do File, Place, and where's my demo file here? So I'm bringing in this SVG here. And let's warp this a little bit. So I placed the SVG here, and if I actually add like a mesh warp to it, I find it always behaves like very strangely. I don't know why it does this. So what I like to do instead, usually whenever I work with SVGs, this is kind of a tip, is open the SVG manually in Affinity Designer. So I've opened it up here, and then what I do is I just copy it. So let me copy it over here. Control V. And now the mesh will actually work much better. So I'll add a mesh to it itself here. Now it actually seems to kind of be better behaved here. And I kind of like designs like this. They're kind of, I don't know, trippy is what you would call them or something like that. But you can, this is a vector here and I can distort it like that. Okay, so it looks, has kind of like this melted effect, almost like psychedelic or so. And I could put multiple ones in different places, you know. So kind of a design like that. So, you know, I copied the warp group here, but it kind of gives you an idea of the flexibility there, you know. I think a lot of these designs I find are, again, for these kind of like psychedelic, trippy designs here. Let's look at one of the other ones, quad and perspective. And something I should mention, actually, let me go back to the other one for a second. Let me simplify this. Let me drag it over to the side. So something we'll be seeing is that when you select something that you have the warp group here, you'll have some options up on the top menu bar here, okay? So one thing is like you can actually change the type of warp you use, so you can always change that. You can also mute the mesh, so if you want to temporarily hide the effect, you can click this checkbox here, and now just like, basically it's like hiding the effect of the warp group. So that's this button here, mute mesh. And you can kind of toggle something on and off if you don't want to have that effect there. But I'll show you later, like you can also change the type of it. So if I go quad, well, I just, you know, then you can go and do another effect to it. So you have the different options here. And I have to turn off mute mesh, of course. But we can add the other effect. You can always change the type of warp group as well by selecting up here. So let's look at quad and perspective. So these two are very similar, but there's a slight difference to them. And I'll show you what it is. So first of all, I guess let me show you kind of originally. Let's take this one out of the way to begin with. Let's just start with something basic. Let's do the smiley face one. So I'll do the quad one here. So I'll go once again to warp group. Then I'll click quad. And you can see this one's a little bit different in that I can kind of almost add like a perspective look to it here. So I can kind of make it like that. And maybe want to make it at an angle or something like that. Let's do the perspective one. So what's happening with both of these is I kind of get these 4 control points on the side. So perspective, it looks kind of similar to what I just did. But perspective is actually a little bit better at maintaining perspective, as the name implies, but it's really hard in this example to see. So I made another example that hopefully shows it a little more clearly. So let me show you my original example here. So these are kind of like the classic train tracks example. So if you know, whenever you study perspective, you see these examples of the train tracks, you know, going into the distance. So let's say you want to like get that same effect with vectors here. Let me add the quad distortion. So I'll go to warp group, quad. And the way you do it is you make the top kind of narrower like this. So I'll make it like that. And you can see it's okay. It kind of works. Let's do it with the perspective one instead though. So I'll take perspective. I'm holding Alt and I'm dragging, by the way, to copy. Sometimes people ask me how I do that. You just, when you want to copy something, just hold Alt and click and drag on it to quickly make a copy of it. So let's try the perspective one. And I'll select perspective. And I'll make this go there. And you can see it just looks a little more convincing, I think. It kind of does a better job of fading out the top, I would say. You can see the planks actually kind of get smaller as they go into the distance, whereas that doesn't seem to happen as well with the quad one. So I'd recommend if you actually do want to achieve like a better perspective look, it may seem like quad does the same thing, but I would recommend perspective instead in this situation. So that's kind of the main difference between these two. And again, I'm not sure exactly how perspective does it. I guess it has some special logic in there that helps make it look better, but I recommend that for when you're like tilting text on a sign or something like that, which I'll show you in a bit. Perspective is better for that. So that's that's the main use case for those two that I would see. Let's look at two more. So next we have arcs, the arc ones. So let's look at the arcs. Yeah, so now we have arc and bend, but I'll look at arc first. So for arc, we have two different options. So we have vertical and horizontal. So let's add a vertical arc here. So I'll go to the warp group, arc, vertical. So you can see like it's kind of nice for, I guess, creating this, I don't know, it almost looks like, it reminds me of, I don't know, like a sign or something like that. But some type of, expanding on this edge here. And again, this is just like a mesh, basically. And actually, let me undo that for a second. So this is what the arc looks like. And this kind of goes to what I was saying before, that everything is really just a mesh. Notice how I applied the arc to it, and it's the arc vertical up here. If I modify this at all, now it became a mesh. So the arc vertical was just a preset, but really it's just like a mesh setting. So when you change anything, your type is going to go back to mesh here. So if you didn't see that, I'll do it again. I added the arc vertical thing here, but it's just a preset. And if I kind of modify, if you make any kind of change, now it's going to be a mesh. And you can't, I don't know if you can go back. I guess you can go back to that. But if you can, when you make changes, you can go, it's going to be the default mesh again. So second material, you're saying for Windows, Control plus mouse button must be pressed when duplicating. Let me see. I think they both work. They seem to work the same for me. So I did Control here, so that works. And then I did Alt also. So I just have the habit of doing Alt. But yeah, Control works also. Thanks for the tip. So horizontal arc, let's do that one. Horizontal. So you can see it kind of bends like this. And I think this is somewhat useful, but probably usually there's a more useful way of doing this effect that people want when they bend stuff like this. Usually when you're bending something like this, and I'm using text as an example, maybe there's some other situation you want it, but usually they want the text to go on a circular path. So let me show you kind of like an alternate way of doing that. And this isn't like with the vector warp, this is just kind of like an alternate technique for achieving the same thing. So kind of to do a similar effect, whenever you draw a, I guess, curve or a path in Affinity Designer, you can actually put text on this shape here. So with this circle selected, I'm going to select my artistic text tool here, artistic text tool. And when you hover over like the edge of something, it's not showing the mouse when I zoom in. But if you can see there's like that T with the curvy thing there, I can click here and I can drag and I can start typing, testing. And I do have a video on this also, but this is kind of how you can actually put something on a circular path. So I have these control points where I can kind of snap it to the different parts. And you can see it's centered there. Usually it's not centered by default. Usually the paragraph alignment, which you can't really see, but usually it's like to the left there. If you see that, you just want to make sure you select the correct paragraph alignment to center. So I'll make it centered, and you can do that. But and then you can resize the circle. So sometimes you get a better effect, and that works with all sorts of shapes. So you can also do like a pencil. You can draw a path like this, and it's not going to look that great, but I could actually take my text tool here, artistic text tool, click and drag on my my path and type, what I want like that. And I can move it all around. Again, I can align it. Maybe I do want to align it left here. And it's all updated in real time. Like I can move the dots here and they'll change shape like that. So that's another way you can get that effect going. Delete this. But just in case you missed it, let me do it one more time. So if you draw a circle, another way to get this bending effect is to just draw a circle like that and then select your artistic text tool, click on the edge here, and you can drag to set the size if you like, and then just start typing. This one went on the bottom, so you can do it on the bottom also if you want. You can do it like on the inner part or the outer part. So, and then let me center it. Yeah. So that's another way of going about that. Faceless Fortune reading your comments. She spent over 2 months trying to do a tessellation design. gave up and just paid someone from Fiverr. Just wondering if you would cover this topic in another stream. Thank you. Yeah, it's something I can look into. I've done it a little bit in the past. I've done seamless patterns. Tessellation is interesting. Remind me during the Q&A if I forget to talk about it. It's kind of a little bit off of where I'm going now, but I do have a couple points I can say about it during the Q&A session. So remind me if I forget about it. So moving on to the next one, and bend is very similar to the arc one, if I remember correctly. Bend vertical. Yeah, it's kind of a similar effect. I think it's just more pulled to the side, and we can do bend horizontal. It's just kind of more flared out, I think. So again, it's probably mostly useful for text, but maybe there's other uses for it too. Kind of creating like cool text effects. So I didn't really have too much to say about bend. And there's two more ones. So now, how are we doing for time? 12:30. Yeah, fisheye and twist. Again, these are kind of plays on the basic mesh tool. So if I select this, if I select fisheye, zoom in, you can see it kind of like bulges the middle here. Now what's interesting about this one is you'll notice there's these controls up top here. So this says value 25%. I can actually like increase that more. So you can increase it. I don't know if you can go above 100. No, you can't go above 100. Can you go negative? Yeah, you can go negative too. So you can actually go, yeah, you can go negative 100%. So you can go positive, kind of like this way, kind of bulge out the center. Or you can go negative to kind of punch in the middle like that there. And this might be one where I can show you that dot thing. So if I click here, so I placed the dot in the middle. If I click and drag it, I can move it around like so. So just to review what I did there, if you click in the middle of a patch, I think it's called a patch, like a continuous area here, I get a dot and I can click it and I can kind of pull that patch around as I like. So this might be something that's kind of useful for certain designs. So the fisheye one, again, you have like the controls up top, and you can see it reverts to a mesh when you start to mess with it again, like the other one that we saw. Once you kind of make a change, it just falls back to the default mesh. So the one that's similar to that is also twist. So let's look at twist. Whoops. Warp group, twist, and it just kind of twists it around. And like the other one, you have this value here where you can change it, or you can decrease it like so. You can go clockwise or counterclockwise, I suppose, how you could say it. So yeah, like that. So there's kind of two examples of those. So that kind of covers the what they actually do. I thought I'd show you a couple examples of like using them in a real example. Redundant examples in a real example, but let's look at actually some use cases here. One thing that's interesting is you can kind of like, you can warp vectors and then put them in text. So for example, let's do something here. Let's create kind of an interesting little shape. Let's just do this. I'm pressing Control J to just repeat what I did. So that's how I get a bunch of copies there. And let's make them a little smaller. Whoops. Pull it up a little bit. And then I like to space them evenly. I'll just use these controls up here to, I'll just align them in the center. And then I like this one over here to space evenly vertically. So I do this a lot. Whoops. So now they're spaced evenly like that. And let's group them. So we can apply some type of like cool mesh to them. I don't know, just mess it up a little bit. Make it look kind of strange. Sometimes I try to click on the center point and it clicks on the Bezier point, which kind of makes it do that wobbly thing. But what you can do is, let's say you have text. So let me add some text here. So I don't know, zebra. And I can take my warp group and I can actually, over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag it into the text. So I'll take this, I'll drag it in, and I'll move it. And you can't see it right now because it's black. Let me make it white. So now I made it white. So now I have like that warp text inside, that warp shape inside my text. Let me make it red so you can see. Yeah, there we go. So it's kind of cool, like the way you can, you know, and I can still change it inside here. So it's a kind of a cool thing that you can actually put it right in text like that. So that's one interesting use case there, I think. So again, what I did is when I created the warp group, I just dragged it under the text for zebra, and that's kind of how you contain some type of image or even a vector to the shape of text. That works with raster images too, by the way, in case you guys didn't know that. We talked about that a little bit a couple weeks ago. Let me just show you so you know. Say zebra. Let me find a zebra pattern online. Just trying to find a zebra pattern here. This looks interesting. So this is an image, right? So if I want to do this with an image, over here I click and let go over my text. So now I can put an image inside that too, and I can move that around. So there's all sorts of different ways you can do these things, but it's a very useful ability to kind of put stuff in text like that. And what we did is we put a warped vector group in there. So that's one interesting thing, I think. Let's look at another example. This is a good one of using perspective, but we can also go to Affinity Photo to touch up something. So for example, let's say I want to clear out this word Wall Street. I just want a blank sign that I can put my own text in. So let's go to Affinity Photo. We can use the inpainting tool for that. So I'll do File, Edit in Photo. And then the one again I like to add a pixel layer above it. It's not necessarily to add a pixel layer, but I like to do it just so it's non-destructive. And I'm going to select the inpainting brush tool here. So that's this tool. I'll select current layer and below. Let's see if this works in one try. Sometimes you need to clean things up a little bit to make it work. Like sometimes it pulls in too much stuff to the space you're trying to fill in. Pretty much perfect. Clean that up. Clean that up. Let's get rid of street. It's gone. Okay. So now let's go back to Affinity Designer. So go File, Edit in Designer. And let's add some text. Let's say Main Street. So this would be a good one to use the perspective group on. So I'll select the perspective group. I'll go Warp Group. And I'll select Perspective down here. And you can see I can kind of bend it around and change it. So typically for perspective, what you want to do is look for those parallel lines that you want to line up with. So the top of the sign, well, let's look at the bottom of the sign. Turn off snapping. I kind of want to follow that bottom edge like that. So you can see that's the way the bottom edge is going. Same thing for the top edge there. So I want to position it so the top lines are basically following the top part there. And the trick is to also simultaneously make it so it's going up and down with these guys, with the side edges. So I think that's pretty good. It's good enough for now. So I like that. So I can zoom out. Now we have this other text here. So let's see. So this is before, after. So before, after. And there's stuff you can do to make it look a little more realistic. You can, for the Main Street text, you can maybe reduce the opacity a little bit so it fades a little bit. You can give it a little bit of a drop shadow, because if you look at this text here, it's a label and it actually has like a little bit of a shadow you can see there. We can actually do that with the with this text here. So I'll go to FX. I'll go to outer shadow. Let's add a little bit of an outer shadow here. Just a subtle bit there. So it gives a little more volume there. And then, you could add more of a texture to make it a little more beat up, like you scruff it up a little bit so it looks a little more natural. But let me group this together. So before, after, before, after. And that's just using the warp group, the perspective warp group there, like that. And we did a little touch-up work in Affinity Photo to fix it. Now, one thing you can do is you can also use nested warp groups together. So let me show you that. Once again, yeah, let me, well, my mouse just jumped. Let's just create like another stripe example. Will this work? Yeah. Let's group this together. So I can do like a mesh warp to this. Let's do like a mesh warp. So I'll add a mesh warp. And we could just bend it, make it look kind of strange. I clicked the wrong thing there. Let's see. Just get something going. So this is a mesh warp, but then we can go and we can add a perspective warp to it. So with the warp group selected, I'll add another one. I'll select warp group, and then I'll say perspective. And now I can go and like make it actually, give it some sense of perspective. You can see it's kind of like the redraw isn't quite working there, but when I zoom in and out, it eventually works. So this is kind of interesting there. Like you can actually nest the different warp groups together and also make, kind of get a wavy thing going, then make it look a little more 3D like that. So yeah, something about the redraw part is, let me pull that in a little bit, maybe that'll help. So again, this over here, you can see the nested warp groups like that. So that's basically the main stuff I would say about the vector warps. They're quite powerful and flexible. Mostly I use them with text, but there are times where you'll, where's the sign example? You might want to put them on like a sign or something where they're kind of, you're bending your text. Text is a vector. I mentioned that a couple weeks ago, but text is a vector, so you can, use these effects with it. And I find it quite useful in that situation. So that was basically the overview of that. Let me know if you guys have any questions on it. And Faceless Fortune, let me answer your question here. So yeah, this is the text example. So it's been a while since I've done tessellation or anything like that. And I haven't done it with Affinity Designer. I just kind of remember basically, when you're doing tessellation, I'm going to give you an example here. I'm trying to remember. I think I did it like in Illustrator like a long time ago. And this is just like, I'm just going off the cuff here because it's been a while. But, basically, if you kind of cut a piece out of something, like a puzzle piece or something like that, if I remember, you basically want to, do this. Kind of whatever you take out of one side, you have to put on the other side, right? So if I remember correctly, you have to when you're taking something out of if you cut out something on one end, you have to put it on the other. So I think basically, let's do the knife tool again. So yeah, like this. Yeah, this is like the way it would be like this, right? I think like you do something like that. So this would like match itself, and then you would have like another thing like so if you're going to copy these around, this would like fit into itself like that. I need to do that. I would have to line this up correctly and everything like that. But I'm trying to remember like if there are any actual tools in Affinity Designer to make this easier. I'm not exactly sure how, but something I can look in more in the future. So like I said, I have a video on seamless patterns, which is slightly related, but I think pure tessellation I haven't actually done in Affinity Designer. I'd have to review it a little bit. So it's something I did a long time ago, I think, in Illustrator. So I'll add that to my list. Hi, Will, Lee. Glad you're here. So let me look at your other questions from the week. And of course, if you guys have any other questions, feel free to ask here. So I got this question on one of my Canva videos here, which was, does it work with Google Fonts? Can you upload Google Fonts to Canva? And the answer is yes, mostly. Basically anything that's an OTF file or a TTF file, if you upload it to Canva, it will work. However, Google Fonts has lots of other advanced type fonts that might not work. And when I say advanced type fonts, what I mean is there's kind of new types of fonts. I don't know why it's not showing here, but there's these ones like the color fonts. We looked at some of those briefly, and the variable fonts. So the variable fonts are the ones where you can dynamically adjust the bold and italic to any setting you want. You're not just limited to one value there. And I don't think Canva works with the color fonts and the variable fonts. Yeah, no problem, Faceless. I'll try to look at some more. Hopefully get a better answer to you. But there are like color fonts. And I don't think, yeah, I saw it the other day, but like it's not showing up here. But anyway, it's one of those advanced types of fonts that even Affinity Designer doesn't support it either. So yeah. I've got another font question. This is a question on a video I made a long time ago. I was doing like book covers and using some fonts for those. And the question was, did the fonts support the Arabic alphabet? And the answer is usually not. When you make a font, the designer of the font has to really, literally design every single character for the most part. And most Latin, English, European fonts aren't going to have Arabic fonts in them. But there are Arabic fonts you can download online if you want. I also think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Arabic is also right to left too, which is a whole other set of, it's a whole other set of issues for rendering Arabic text on your screen. So I don't have a lot of experience with it. I did a little bit of it when I was with a company, but I was working with a guy from Egypt, and he took over most of the Arabic stuff. So I only kind of saw over his shoulder. But it looks quite complicated the way it was laid out, because again, right to left is very different than left to right for English and a lot of the other, Western languages. So yeah, usually a font isn't going to have Arabic supported by default. You're probably going to want to look for specific Arabic fonts. So that's that issue. So like I said, I released this video this week about the switching between the Affinity programs. You saw me do that a couple times today on stream. And I got this question from Peter Todd. A couple of people made a similar comment about like, why hasn't Serif just like put everything into one program and then switch between them, using personas? And I think the answer is yes. I mean, the secret is it could just be one big program, But I think for marketing purposes, they want to split it into 3 programs and really contrast them with the Adobe products. I think that's how they're positioning themselves. So they really want to say like, instead of Photoshop, use Photo, instead of Illustrator, use Designer, and instead of InDesign, use Publisher. They really want to kind of from my observation, I have no inside knowledge, it's just the way it seems to me, is they're really trying to position themselves to compete head to head with each of the products. And I think if they put it all into one program, it would kind of dilute that message. And it might also just make it too overwhelming and complex. I mean, there's a lot of tools across the programs, just throwing them all into one thing might be overwhelming. But yeah, I mean, technically, I have no doubt it could be done. It's just, again, I think marketing, positioning reasons, they haven't done it that way. So yeah, but if you check out this video, it shows you how to switch between them quite easily. So that's a benefit there. And I got this question from Mike Pick Graphics. He says he's getting strange characters on his text. Yeah, I think what you probably did is somehow on the text menu, there's a show special characters here. And if I click this, you'll see these symbols, like end of string or whatever. The spaces are a little square there. We have the paragraph markers. So, of course, it's very annoying if you accidentally turn it on. I don't know the hotkey to turn it on, but to turn it off, just go to text, show special characters, and then they're gone. Sometimes it's useful. You want to know, like, okay, is there 2 spaces there or 1? But for the most part, you kind of want it off, but that's how you do that one. So that's the last question I have for today. I'll stay on for another couple minutes if you guys have any questions about vector stuff or any of the other stuff I've gone over. So I'm trying to publish a video every day this month. It's kind of like my challenge. I'm not going to keep it up forever, but for August, that's the goal. So you may have noticed I've been posting videos, short videos like this every day. And yeah, just kind of doing like quick little tips, little design things, little tricks and things that might be interesting. And any suggestions you guys have, I'm always open to it. I kind of batch them about a week ahead of time. So that's kind of the schedule I'm on. And I think, I'll probably go back to maybe some longer videos eventually, but right now I'm just kind of experimenting with the shorter formats. And it seems like they're going over well. A lot of people say they like the shorter time. Like, I guess it's kind of more efficient for them. So that's good. But that's kind of what I got going on for the next couple weeks or so. Next live stream will be next week. I'm not quite sure what I'll cover yet. I usually look at some comments and stuff like that and go from there. But yeah, I might do something I do want to do is design reviews. And I did a video about that a couple weeks ago for Breezer's channel. And I've gotten some other submissions through email for like improving like suggestions for how people want to improve certain photos or things like that. So if you guys have like feedback you want on like your thumbnails or designs for print on demand or anything like that, or any kind of like, reviews, I would like to actually have a, like do that on the stream, like actually just on the stream, just like kind of review things and go over them. Cause I think and it's kind of fun for like everyone to like, look at things and give feedback and stuff. And it's a pretty positive environment. I'm not going to like trash your stuff. Don't worry. Look at my recent video on reviewing the YouTube thumbnails for my approach to that. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Hope you're all going to have a great week. And that's basically all I have for today. I don't see any other questions, but thank you, Barry and Sekhmet, Faceless, Brian, Michael, Big Book Cafe, Breezer. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you next week. Have a good one. Bye.